Good evening and welcome to the Columbia University World Leaders Forum. I want to begin by acknowledging a few people. I'd like to recognize my wife, Jean Mignano-Bollinger, who is sitting right here in front. His Excellency Mohammed Khalid Kiari, Ambassador, Permanent Mission of Tunisia in the United Nations, and his spouse, Mrs. Kiari. Welcome to Columbia University and this forum. I also want to thank Professor Safwan Masri in the Office of the Global Centers, which he leads, for making possible not only this evening's gathering, but also Professor Ben Achour's week-long residency here at Columbia. This evening, we are very honored to host Mr. Achour, a leader of Tunisia's democracy movement and a former president of the nation's high authority of the revolution. This address tonight is just one of many appearances working with our faculty and students talking about the past, present, and future of human rights and democracy in Tunisia. And I want to thank all the guests who are here making their time to be with us this evening. As many of you know, Tunisia is distinctive among the countries of the Arab world that experienced violent upheavals beginning in 2010. Though the path forward has had many obstacles, Tunisia has nonetheless been able to create and now sustain a national system of democratic governance. Sadly, this has not been the case with many other Arab nations that have devolved into violence and humanitarian crisis, leading in turn to the displacement of vast numbers of refugees. Tunisia stands as a hopeful but not uncomplicated counterpoint. In 2014, after 2 years of deliberations, Tunisia embraced a new constitution. Shortly thereafter, Columbia welcomed Tunisian President Monsef Marzouki to this very forum. He memorably described the events that began in 2010 not as an Arab Spring, but as a volcanic eruption revealing the fault lines in many Arab societies. This was a moment of challenge, he said then, that would shape a generation. Tonight, Mr. Ben Achour will discuss the compromises required to preserve the health of a democratic government in a nation where strong religious belief and an emerging civil society each lay claim to the passions of individual citizens and to Tunisia's cultural norms. The high authority for the revolution that Mr. Ben Achour led was a body that ushered in Tunisia's constitutional reform that prepared the nation for its first free elections following the revolution in 2011. Mr. Ben Achour is a scholar of Islamic legal theory and constitutional law, and he has dedicated himself to exploring the complex relationships among Islam, secular democracy, and international law. He has pursued these subjects as a student at the University of Paris, where he received his degree in law and political science, and he has been the Dean of the Faculty of Legal, Political, and Social Sciences at the University of Carthage. Currently, he serves as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which oversees member states' compliance with the UN's Treaty on Civil and Political Rights. The leadership that Mr. Ben Achour provided in the aftermath of the Jasmine Revolution earned him the admiration and gratitude of Tunisian citizens and countless others around the world. I have to say, on behalf of Jean, my wife, Safwan, the meeting we had in Tunisia with Mr. Ben Achour was a revealing experience in trying to understand how to put together a democratic but also a responsive government to citizen needs and concerns and emotions and beliefs in Tunisia. All of us, I think, watched Tunisia with a sense of deep hope And what Mr. Ben Achour has accomplished is truly, truly historic. Can't tell you how much I look forward to hearing him this evening. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Yadh Ben Achour. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you so much for your so kind words. Dear colleagues, dear students, dear guests and friends, let me, at the beginning of my speech, tell you how I'm happy to be here among you, and how I'm also happy to contribute to the activity of Columbia University. I want to thank you, Mr. President, for your invitation and for giving me the opportunity to be here today. And I want also to thank my colleague, Safwan Masri, the Executive Vice President of the Global Centers of Columbia University, to give me also this opportunity to speak about a sensitive subject, which is the relation between the civil state and the religion in the Tunisian post-revolution. Mr. President, it is easy for me to speak English in order to thank and to congratulate, but it is not so easy for me to deal with this subject in English. So allow me the possibility to change the language register and to make my address in French. Donc, le sujet que je vais traiter est un sujet,
so the subject that I'm going to handle is one that is extremely sensitive,
et je voudrais
and I would like
signaler,
to point out,
puisque nous allons parler de
since
compromis,
we're going to talk about compromising,
que pour reprendre
that
la formule
to pick up
de
the
Clausewitz qui disait que la guerre
Klotsky's
est la poursuite,
formula,
la
who says
continuation
that
de la politique par d'autres moyens,
war is the continuation of politics by another road, I'd like to switch it around and say that politics is also the pursuit of war, but by other means. The difference between the two formulas is that
dans la guerre, il n'y a pas
in
de
war,
compromis
there is no compromise possible.
C'est ou la victoire,
Either it's
ou la
victory
défaite.
or defeat.
Dans ce phénomène de violence,
In
il
this
n'y a pas de compromis possible.
phenomenon of violence, there is no compromise
En
possible.
politique,
But in
il en va
politics, it's a bit different.
En politique, précisément,
In politics, precisely,
nous pouvons dire que la politique, c'est
we can say
le
that
domaine par
politics
excellence.
is the domain par excellence of compromise.
Quotidiennement, les acteurs politiques passent des
Every day, politicians make compromises in order to have peace
compromis dans leur société.
in their societies.
Et précisément,
And specifically, Tunisia
beaucoup expérimenté.
has experimented a great deal with compromise.
Pourquoi?
Why?
Quelle raison?
For what
Tout
reasons?
simplement
Quite simply,
parce que une révolution
because a revolution
des énergies dans une société.
liberates all the energies in a society. A revolution liberates energies
Contraste, libère
and exposes the contrasts and the contradictions.
en Tunisie,
And in Tunisia,
dans le monde arabe, la
just as everywhere in the Arab world, the
les idéologies.
Tunisian revolution liberated all the energy, all the political energy, all the forces. And so it's normal to find yourself after a revolution in a society that is in full confrontation, it is divided, and dangerously exposed to the threats of civil war. Consequently, compromise has become necessary. If we want to avoid violent confrontations, compromise became necessary. So to choose among so many contradictions between the state and revolutionary dynamics, for example, contradictions between cultural models that the revolution liberated, because the revolution liberated all cultural models. Salafism, modernism, feminist movements, democratic movements, secular movements. And so we found ourselves constantly confronting one another. But among these contrasts and contradictions of the revolution, there's one that has to be put into relief quite particularly, and that's the contradiction between the people in the revolution and the people who elect, the voters. During the revolution, we had a unified group of people. It's false to believe that the revolution was exclusively that of the poor people. Yes, it was in great part a revolution of poor people, and certainly poor people started it, but it also unified middle classes, university people, pharmacists, architects, judges, lawyers, etc., and even captains of industry. So it was a general revolution in the entire society. And before that revolution, we had demonstrations, divisions, which we saw during those first elections, where we saw the Islamist revolution, without considering revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries. So therefore, we were obliged to proceed with compromise. We had compromises on the legitimacy of power because everything fell apart in 2011, and we had to come up with something in order to just continue moving. We had to invent institutions that didn't even exist before. As President Bollinger just cited, the revolution was a creation without a basis, from nothing. And so we had to put together our solutions, compromise government-wise, through the provisions of the Constitution. And in the speech that I'm talking to you today, I'm talking about a specific compromise, and that's the one between civil state and theocentric. I'll explain to you in a bit why I say theocentric and not theocratic. Before that, I have to specify to you what I mean by compromise, historic compromise. What is a compromise? How does a compromise become historical? Allow me to stop a few moments on this question, which I think is very important, before getting to the heart of my subject. A compromise implies or presupposes the existence of a certain number of elements, and I'm going to cite them quickly. A compromise, first of all, implies the existence of a problem, a question to resolve, a question. We are before a question mark. And this question mark appeals to contradictory possibilities. So that's the first thing. A problem arises. Secondly, a compromise implies an environment of competition among several different actors. In other words, when you just have a single political party in a country with a charismatic single head, no opposition, etc., in that environment, You can't have the survival of compromise because everything is regulated before it ever gets to the people. Consequently, compromise necessarily implies competition among several different actors. That's what we had. We had a monolithic regime before. It was unilateral. The revolution gave us a plural reality, competition, political competition. Thirdly, a compromise implies that two or several proposals, which are contradictory, may be presented by the various actors in order to resolve their problem, their common problem. And these proposals don't go together. These are proposals that are different, and they are even contradictory sometimes, and yet we have to choose from among them. And this is very important to understand Tunisia. Compromise demands consciousness among political actors that, in the absence of a decision, they are running great risks and dangers for themselves and for their society. So the actors have to be conscious that in the absence of a decision, non-decision, if you wish, can be fatal. And this element was really important in Tunisia, and I'll explain that in a moment. When is a compromise historical? Rapidly, it's historical when, on the fundamental questions concerning the great future of a society, that compromise counts. Compromise, as I've said before, has to be a daily exercise. But what's the difference between organizational compromises or voting systems, etc., and, on the other hand, a historical compromise? A historical compromise is one that contributes to the great events in history, and without them, without such compromises, a society can die. Or the historical compromise then challenges the very existence of the society itself. How did the subject of compromise come up in Tunisia? The facts are there. Obviously, I have to go a little quickly because I don't want anybody to jump up here and cut me off. The problem arose right after the revolution. 2010, 2011 is the year of the revolution, and before the October elections in 2011 of the National Assembly, the Salafist movement, because, as you said, all the energies were liberated, and so the Salafist movement also immediately in March of 2011 started to come up on university campuses. They were demonstrating also. I'll give you an example. In June 2011, there was an attack against the movie theater where a Tunisian filmmaker had shown a film called Neither God Nor Master. The title itself, Neither God Nor Master, was provocative for conservative minds, and so the movie theater was attacked. Another example, also in 2011, a TV channel in Tunisia showed a kind of extremely artistic graphic show. You know Persepolis. You've heard of Persepolis. So this show had a representation of a dialogue between a child, a little girl, and God. And God was represented as a gorgeous-looking old man with a big beard. Nothing offensive. But in spite of that, the fact that God was present in this film gave God a human face, provoked very dangerous aggressions because Islam is an iconoclastic religion which doesn't permit a representation of God through images.
Nous arrivons aux élections de 2011, d'octobre 2011, et dès la première réunion,
we get to the election of 2011, and from the first meeting of the Assembly, this is what we heard. The exact date was November 22nd, 2011. It was the first meeting of the Assembly. At the end of the meeting, a leader of the Islamist party came out and said exactly those words. We are going to introduce, I am quoting, we are going to introduce in the Constitution dispositions so that Islam can become the reference, the starting point, so that the Assembly can make up laws. The institution, whether they're for learning, social institution, political institution, and this is the end of his quote. From that moment on, from these appearances, and I can tell you that I'm summarizing a lot, from that moment, there was in the society events that were violence against art, against intellectuals, against the Constitution, and there appeared a real fear that came from the democratic part, for the women, for the non-religious people. And we were in front of a real confrontation from the beginning of the revolution. And I can say, to summarize all this, that this is going to get worse and worse with time passing. But we were here facing a problem, and therefore, because of this problem, we had a choice between two solutions, whether either a violent solution with a risk of civil war or an agreement on compromises, with compromises. I'm going to try to attempt to present to you all these questions with two main aspects. I'm going to talk to you about the roots of the compromise and then the protest against this compromise. The roots of this compromise they existed already in the old Tunisian society. Since the big reforming movement that was created in our country, the big texts that were followed by a movement that modernized the country. In the traditional society, I've said this already a few times in this university, the traditional society was united. It was held together, and it did not depend on, it was not separated by religion, law. It was a society within which the individual was under the pressure of the collective awareness. So the subject, it was impossible to consider the possibility of thinking individually. Brutal breaks, brutal rupture have happened in this way of thinking. And I'm going to give you three examples, symbolic examples that are going to show this mechanism of this way of thinking, this social practice that was broken. The first symbolic text was when slavery was abolished through a decree of the King Ahmed I in 1846, in January 1846. I don't have time to go into details, but if you read the text of this decree on the abolition of slavery, you see that it is a real monument as far as literature documents are concerned. It shows that Tunisia was going already aiming towards something different, a new way of thinking, a new system of ideas. And then the movement goes on, and there is the Fundamental Pact in 1957 and the first Tunisian constitution. And it's true that behind all these big texts, there is the hand of the big other countries influencing, like the French and the British. But this doesn't matter. What is important, is essential, is that a new intellectual way of thinking from the mentalities are shifting. And then this movement will extend the modernization. New schemes will happen for a civil state, a state that can be autonomous and not dependent on religion. And again, I have to go through this very quickly, and this will continue during the whole protectorate. In other words, up until the movement of national liberation, and it will continue on until essentially the independence of the state that was acquired after the triumph and the success of the Nationalist Party of Tunisia under the President Bourguiba. And I will say that under this system, I'm not talking about the man Bourguiba, but I'm talking about the system. He really represented a system that was not really very democratic. It was more authoritative, but it had a system of formation, and that is why Bourguiba grabbed the bull by the horn, the problem of family, and in 3 years before the Tunisian constitution, it wanted to reform the law of family with preventing polygamy from being allowed, and this belonged in a Arabic state, and that was a revolution within itself. It was a revolution. Consequently, this dualism, this confrontation between those two ways of thinking, the theocentrical way and a system that pushed more for the civil state, already existed, because during all this, during the reform of the 19th century, during the movement of the young Tunisia, during the movement anti-colonialists, during the independence, always the strengths that wanted to modernize had the initiative, but the conservative forces were there present, and they were defending their stands. Reforms saw a lot of hostility through the big University of Zaïkoun in Tunisia. The movement Young Tunisians and the movement of young nationalists had people against it. An organization, Ashouben, the Young Muslims, was one of those. And then after First World War, the voice of the student Zaytounia, that was representing the student, religious student, and with Bourguiba, there was the hostility of the movement Yousifist. And I stop here to say that all these movements of modernization took place in front of a movement of resistance that was theocentrical for modernization. So this is the historical background, long-term background. But the revolution, as I said before, brought upon big changes, among others, an attempt at Islamization of the society and the state before the election in October 2011 and after the elections of 2011. I'm going to give you a few examples, really not very many. Around February 2012, a project to create a constitution started happening. And this project had an article, Article 10, that affirmed that Islamic Sharia will be the main source of Tunisian law, Tunisian rights. An attempt at making more Islamist the constitution. Second, during the work of the assembly, a lot of efforts were made by some parties, to introduce the idea that Islam was the religion of the state. That's another sign. Third sign, projects were presented to penalize the attempt against the sacred. And there we presented an attempt against the Constitution and reforming the Constitution that would punish any attempt, oral or in writing, against the sacred would be punished with 4 years of jail. And it is clear that the revolution itself had brought on, or that the revolution was feeding the old concepts that existed already in the old society. They made them stronger. Why? Because the initiative changed camps. The initiative does not belong to the modernists anymore, like during the middle of the 19th century, then the nationalist movement, then Bourguiba, and so on. In all these phases, the initiative belonged to the modernization. But here, there is an abrupt change of decor, and the party, it goes to the other side, to the Islamic Party. In seeing this approach, this more conservative approach, there were resisting forces, of course, and I'm going to give you some examples that I've lived through personally. In March 2012, big protests took place after the incidents. Maybe we will discuss those. Big protests took place in Tunis and other places, asking for Sharia as a source for the right, and asking for the Caliphate. One of the slogans was in Arabic, the people want again the Caliphate. So there were big protests, but these protests, a few days later, were followed by as big protests that were as big, still in March 2012. And the slogan of those protests was, in Arabic, the people want a civil state. Amongst the slogan, we heard Tunisia is not Afghanistan. We heard also Tunisia is not a fatwa state, and so on and so on. And you can see consequently that the revolution made the contrasts bigger, and these protests could have ended very badly. It could have become violent. Thankfully, we avoided that. And this is the historical background. And this is also what followed after the revolution. So now you have the background. So you understand these two different tendencies. one with a civil state and the other one pushing for a theocentrical state. And these both existed for a very long time, but they became more accentuated with the revolution, that became more important with the revolution. I told you I was going to explain why I say theocentrical instead of theocratic. It's because I think that a theocratic state has never really existed on Earth. I said to students who came to listen to me this morning with their professor, I was telling them, if we take, for example, the Byzantine Empire, or when Vatican was a real state, not the Vatican as is right now, but the Vatican of the 15th or 16th century, the Vatican of the Borgias, the Vatican that was powerful, the powerful state of the church. If we took that state, we could see that even that state was not entirely theocratic, because it's impossible to apply to human beings in an absolute manner rules that come from above, from heaven. So that's why I prefer using the term theocentrical. This is something that asks for a society where men, women, humans are directed by laws of God, and that we accept the idea that state and religion can receive one unique leader. That's what we can ask for. And the theocentrical tendency is asking for two things mainly. It's not asking for Islamization of fiscal rights or commercial rights. It's asking for Islamization of banks, of the bank system, and especially the legal and family law, the criminal and family law. So now I will start again my subject. We are in front of a request for a civil state and a religious state. And we have to find compromises, and we have to see what are the compromises that were adopted and how do they present themselves. And that's what I'm going to present to you. First, let me tell you that the compromise was made possible in Tunisia thanks to two main factors. One was conceptual, and one was thanks to the circumstances. The conceptual factor is that the word civil state has many understanding, many ways of being interpreted, and I've heard many leaders of the Islamic movement to say we absolutely agree with the civil state. Islam is for the civil state. So there is something we can play with the how these words could be understood. And the second factor that came into play for Tunisia is the situation in the Arab world. Tunisians saw with their own eyes what happened in Syria, what happened in Egypt, what happened in Libya, their very near neighbor, what happened to Yemen. And they became very scared. And the leaders in Tunisia, seeing how the anarchy and all the other Arabic countries were dealing with turmoil, they saw, and I can admit with the scientific mind I have to have when I'm speaking with you, because I am with a background of an intellectual in a university, is that the leaders, whichever they were in Tunisia, they were all answering their call of their duty and avoided the catastrophe in their country.
The compromises that did pass were quite numerous. First of all, a first one, before I terminate, I'd like to say, was the first article of the Constitution. Tunisia is a free and sovereign state. Its religion is Islam. Its language is Arabic. Everybody was in agreement. The Islamists said, okay, as long as you say that Islam is the religion. The modernists said Islam is the revolution of Tunisia, is the religion of Tunisia, not of the state. What's the difference? When you say Islam is the religion of Tunisia, we're describing something. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. But when you say that Islam is the religion of the state, that can have extremely bad consequences, legally speaking. So that was the compromise. The second compromise was one that was made in favor of the sacred. It's very difficult in Tunisia today to publicly confess that one does not believe in God. This is politically, practically impossible. I can't imagine in Tunisia today or tomorrow an association where a political party is founded on radical secularism which totally rejects Islam and religion in general from the political scene. This is a compromise that was made in favor of religion. And even today, when we hear speeches by religious people, we note that the speeches have Quranic references in them. There are always religious references in whatever they do. The third compromise that was not in favor of religion is perhaps the biggest one. We succeeded in introducing into the Constitution an article which says the following. So we have the Article 1 I've just described to you. Now we have Article 2, which says Tunisia is a civil state. It was very important to have this written down in the Constitution, and it was really the subject of a great struggle, which is their civil state founded on citizenship, the will of the people, and the primacy of law, the rule of law. So these are all things that refer to a civil state. But to summarize, we have made the big compromise in the Constitution, and then we managed to pass another compromise which avoided a frontal attack on the Islamic religion. There were several compromises on the civil state, but it was the fact that we managed to exclude calling Islam the religion of the state. So in our compromise, we managed to preserve the proposal X, and Y, which are two contradictory things and which refer to the other party. In other words, a pluralism that can exist. Now, Article 6, on the other hand, is what explains that. Article 6 is a constitutional potpourri of Tunisian law, because you have the thing and its opposite, and everybody can find what they want in it. If you are theocentric in your tendencies, you will find formulas such as the state protects religion, as well as the state protects what is holy. But the Democrat, who's more secular, man or woman, will see other phrases, those on tolerance, forbidding being accused by authorities in a mosque, and mostly free will. So free will in the Tunisian constitution was the fruit of long work and a long confrontation, and we finally got to introduce free pill and freedom of religion, which has no precedent in the Arab world, because freedom of religion signifies not only freedom of religion, but also that a Muslim, either by conversion or originally, has the right henceforth to leave his religion, to choose another religion, or not to have a religion at all, to be an unbeliever. This is something that was struggled over and that we ended up introducing into the Constitution. This is the only state where the Arab expression, freedom of religious conscience, is in the Constitution. So to summarize and to conclude, the compromises that we managed to pass in order to have this democratic constitution in a paradoxical phenomenon where a political party dominates. Even so, in spite of the presence of political Islamism in our assembly, our National Assembly, we managed to get out of this assembly a democratic constitution, something that could be satisfying to a Democrat. But those compromises that we passed are certainly not they're not perfect, and who might even lead to future conflicts themselves. So I don't want to end this talk on a pessimist note, however. The most important thing that we did in our country maybe isn't so much to have achieved such compromises on religion. Maybe it's the fact that we succeeded in opening up a democratic debate, generalized, massive, a popular debate where all of the Tunisian population contributed. Before, there were subjects that were taboo. It was not possible to even think of them, like LGBT people, or being a non-believer, or fundamental questions of a religion being a state religion. It's not that we really succeeded in doing everything, but we did. But it's what we managed not to do. In other words, unleash a civil war and to introduce into our country a very democratic thing, debate. For the first time in their history, Tunisians learned how to debate. And they could acknowledge, in spite of their oppositions, one another. And instead of picking up a rifle to shoot somebody, you use your tongue to discuss things, to talk. And the word in Tunisia replaced weapons in Tunisia. That's the success of our country. And I thank you very much for having listened to me.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Ben Achour. This was absolutely spectacular. And it's really wonderful to be hosting you as the first Global Center's Scholar in Residence here on campus. And thank you, Lee, and thank you, Jean, for your support in making this possible. I know we have students, we have faculty who will ask questions, but I'm going to take advantage of being up here on stage and ask you just a couple of questions before we turn it to the audience, if I may. You spoke, obviously, about the culture of compromise and consensus building. Let's discuss for a moment where we are in terms of the evolution of the Islamists in Tunisia, particularly in Nahda, and how it has evolved. Some, including you, have said that Nahda had no choice but to democratize after the revolution. Forces within Tunisia, the failure of the Troika coalition, the experience in Egypt of the Muslim Brotherhood have left the party with very few options. My question to you is, hasn't Nahda's leadership always been enlightened, and perhaps that enlightenment has been rooted in the modernization project that started in the middle of the 19th century? Is it different, or has it always been different, even from the time it was founded as Mouvement Islamique, Tendance Islamique in 1981, different than other Islamist movements? When you look at Ghannouchi and his 22 years in exile, he wrote against Wahhabism. He publicly promised not to reverse women's rights and the Code Statut Personnel. He did a lot of things that made it stand out. Even Edward Said, our own, in referencing Tunisia shortly before his death, said, and I quote, "It's the gentlest country in Africa. Even the Islamists are highly civilized." In Tunisia. Last year, Nahda dropped its Islamist label, redefined itself as a party of Muslim Democrats. Yeah. You have said to me that it is now a secular party as far as you're concerned. So my question is, was Nahda's evolution into a secular party inevitable, given the party's own history and the fact that it was is pandering to a specifically Tunisian constituency? Are we seeing the end of political Islam in Tunisia? Is this the way it has evolved? Another factor that defines Tunisian exceptionalism, and related to that, how much of Nahda's evolution is tied to Ghannouchi? What happens after Ghannouchi dies?
Okay. Thank you, Safwan. Once again, I request the right to speak in French.
I think that the answer that I should give to what has been implied in this question, the answer is implied in the question itself. Certainly, the party itself has changed its representation a great deal. It says, but practices also. Government of alternates, alliance with opposing forces, women's rights are not challenged, etc. Is this evolution a deep one, out of conviction, or one that was just made necessary by the pressure of other players on the political scene? I think this question is not a very important one. The question is, what were the results? In politics, I don't think it's very useful to judge people's intentions. Morally speaking, or religiously speaking, we judge intentions, but in politics, what's interesting is the result. And let's be fair, the result is that the Islamists got into power in 2011 and they lost it in 2014, and they left power. They were taken back to power, put back into power by the current president of the Republic, who had an intelligent idea, I think, who said, it's better to have them beside us where we can see them than against us. So it's a partnership compromise. Consequently, what I'm interested in is the result we got at the end. And I'm going to say something, which is, a lot of my fellow citizens say that the political parties can't really give up their initial desire to the power that they want. The theocentric parties really have only done what they felt forced to do, but the minute they get the chance to impose theocentric laws, they will do so. So that's the big question. These new acquisitions, new ways of thinking, are they really deep among Islamists, or are they superficial? I think wait and see. For now, we have results that seem to be satisfactory because we have avoided war in our country. Don't forget that we are part of a region, and we have neighbors such as the Libyans in a country that practically doesn't even exist anymore. It's been so destroyed. Tunisia has been able to avoid that thanks to everybody's attitudes toward one another, and even the Islamists. I think Rashid is certainly an extremely political and intelligent man, but he's not the only one in the Islamist movement. There is only a fringe in the movement that thinks the way he does. And within the party, there are some very strong theocentric tendencies. As a result, in the future, I should talk about the future. I can't really judge the future because history contains so many contingencies that we can't predict. History is not mechanical, doesn't follow a necessary route, but is full of contingencies, things that could be or could not be, things that change. So you can't really pronounce what the future is going to be. What I can say is that for the moment, we have what we want. Okay, so it works for us. It's enough for now. We have what we need.
Thank you. So my other question is, you talked about breaking taboos, and you mentioned LGBT in particular.
Yes.
And a taboo is broken in Tunisia. It's the only Arab country in which the issue of homosexuality and gay rights are spoken about in the open. Discourse is, for the most part, negative, but it's not always negative. From a constitutional point of view, the Tunisian Penal Code Article 230 continues to criminalize homosexuality, as you know, with imprisonment up to 3 years. There is a contradiction between that penal code and Article 6 of the Constitution. As the Constitution gets translated into law, which I understand is a process that is in its very early stages, what are your hopes for repeal of Penal Code 230? When might the environment be ripe in Tunisia for homosexuality to become socially acceptable or at least legally protected?
The question you're asking are those that are at the heart of Tunisian reality. Tunisia is not paradise, where everything's gorgeous, everything's coming up roses, everything's fine. And on the question of sexual minorities, there is indeed a contradiction between the Constitution itself and Article 6, without discrimination, which prohibits discrimination of race, sex, etc., and the criminal code. It's true that the criminal code is not in favor of homosexuality because it criminalizes it. But don't you think it's significant that the Minister of Justice in person asks that 230 be abrogated? And this was the reason that he had to leave the government. He had to leave the government. So we can't really change mindsets with a magic wand. We can't really change a society simply by having a law. Law is important because it breaks mindsets. It creates new ways of thinking, but it's insufficient. You have to wait for an evolution of mores and morality. What I'm saying to you is that up to now, what's important is that the debate is open on the rights of sexual minorities. Tunisia is one of the rare countries in which we were able to see a film called Bashlof, which is forbidden in the rest of the Arab world. So you have these two effects: the effect of liberty, freedom, the fact that an LGBT, several associations of them have been able to create it in our country. And they are repressed by society nonetheless. By society, I say. So you can have a chauffeur, a taxi driver, who forbids homosexuals to come into his cab. So what has happened is that the law has made those who are against sexual minorities more aggressive in their forbidding homosexuals. But I think a lot of things are being done currently on the level of public debate in order to make what was unthinkable previously not only something that you can think about, but you can discuss. This is the meaning of our revolution. Taboos don't exist anymore. Everything can be thought about. Naturally, sexual minorities are discriminated against in the criminal code, and yet the debate is open. People are living their lives. This is a precursor, which I consider very important.
So we have two microphones on either aisle. We have one. So if any students, faculty, anybody in the audience would like to ask a question, if you can just get to the microphone that's closest to you and introduce yourself and your question. Before you ask your question, I do want to say that Professor Ben Achour, your book that you just published last month, Tunisie, une révolution en pays d'Islam, a revolution in an Islamic land. And so perhaps in the dialogue with the audience, it's worth highlighting why a revolution in an Islamic land is particularly special. But
Yes.
if you don't have a chance, then people will have to get the book and find out. Please.
Hi, my name is Rada Jerfel, and I'm a sophomore at Barnard College. My question to you, as a Tunisian woman, it's true that our constitution is one of the most democratic Republican, in our terms, républicain, and most liberal when it comes to women's rights and equality between women and men, but we still notice that in the Constitution there are still laws that do not put women on the same equal level as men, such as the right to equal inheritance. That is something that's not yet in the legal system. So what do you envision for the future when it comes to such things?
Okay.
That's basically the parity
Thank
between
you.
the sexes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Alors là, oui, vous posez encore une fois.
So here again, you're asking the question of the evolution of women's rights. It's true that the Constitution recognized that equality of women, equality between women and men. However, we still have laws that do not allow or accept equality when it comes to inheritance. Laws that do not allow marriages between a man and a woman of different religions. We also have a society that remains very conservative and a little bit misogynistic in our family, in our behaviors, and so on. But I believe that in order to have a fair view of this, you have to look at the bigger picture. What were we able to accomplish on this subject? What we were able to accomplish was first Article 46 of the Constitution, the one you mentioned, of course. And what we were able to accomplish is that universities today, tribunals today, police force, civil servants, administrations, allow women to work in very large numbers, lawyers, judges. Even as far as the law is concerned, there are some initiatives that are put in place right now. And there is a law that is being put in front of the Assembly right now that represents the people of Tunisia to facilitate equality between men and women when it comes to inheritance. But again, do not hope that do not think that a society from one day to the next, because it has this constitution, will change its mentalities. Constitution is not enough. It is very important as far as the symbolism is concerned, and it's very important. But the constitution, the right, the laws, and I am a lawyer, so I can say that, it's not enough to change mentalities and the depth of the belief of the community. It takes dozens of years and possibly centuries. It takes bourgeois over and over again, political parties, feminist movements, so that little by little and over a long period of time, we will be able to change the mentalities. I do not doubt that there will be a shift in the mentalities. The fact that the debate is open right now on the topic of inequality when it comes to inheritance, the fact that the conversation is open with LGBT, this is the most important that we have to remember of the Tunisian revolution.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really quite insightful. My name is Anne Marie. I'm a graduate student here at Columbia in conflict resolution. And you talked a bit about both manifestations and avoidance of violence. And
what? Please? Would you mind repeating, please?
Manifestation?
Yes?
As well as avoidance of violence.
Yes.
And I was wondering, and you talked about how the compromise kind of helped with that, but I was wondering if you could dive into that more specifically, that avoidance of violence in Tunisia specifically.
Yes, yes.
Peaceful protests and yeah.
Oui, oui, non, mais alors elle pose le problème de la violence à l'égard des femmes.
She talks about violence against women, and so here again, to remain in the same topic or as the previous answer. Right now there is a very big debate that is open, and there is a project for a law that is being discussed about the situation, the position of women, and in particular women that are being attacked, domestic violence. And there is not only a project to create a law about that, but there are also movements, groups, feminine associations that are going in the fields to promote, to talk, to explain, discuss in the field this subject of domestic violence. And there are some associations in the streets that are taking action to change again the mentalities. This problem, you know, it's going to follow us for the near future and even the longer future. We will not change the mentality just because we have a new constitution. Can I say to you even something more important? We will not be able to change the way of thinking of our judges simply because we have a new constitution. After the Constitution of 2014 and its new effect, we still have judges that render decisions that are completely within the old way of thinking frame of mind. Even today, I can't give you the examples, but we have cases put in front of the judges, and they still judge as if the Constitution did not exist, as if the new Constitution did not exist. So we will have this problem in the future. We're still going to have to fight this and discuss it, legally discuss it, and go in the field to change the mentalities. What is in the people's mind, in their beliefs and head, you can change. It's very difficult to change. You can change laws, you can change the rights, but this is how.
Hello, my name is Ahmed, and I'm going to ask the question in French, so excuse me, guys.
So how are we able to avoid violence in the country? Can you talk about that? How were we able to avoid violence in the country? It is because, as I said, with this behavior, this compromise, the behavior for compromise, this consciousness about what's happening around us. And it's really sad to say, but the tragedy of the Syrian people worked in favor of the Tunisians. The Egyptian coup made it possible for the Tunisian leaders to be very careful in order to avoid this type of solution, a coup. So in our context, it gave us an awareness of the dangers and that's it. The consciousness of danger, the ability to compromise. Maybe there is a certain wisdom in the political leaders and this desire to negotiate. Maybe this tendency to use diplomacy rather than weapons, and that is a characteristic of the national Tunisian movement.
It was also helped by the fact that the army has always been small and weak, and it came to the side of the revolution.
Yes,
and
but
the
more
workers.
important is our context, general context in Libya, in Syria. Tunisian we're seeing what is the reality of Syria, of Egypt, and so on, and try to avoid to have the same situation. The status of our army in the constitution, but also in the system state, is important also. Nous avons une petite armée. Nous avons une armée.
We have a small army, an army that Bourguiba set aside from politics from the beginning. So the tradition of the neutrality of the army is also important, as opposed to Egypt. Egypt had a revolution with Nasser, and the president, Jamal Abdel wrote a book called The Philosophy of Revolution. But this revolution was still a military revolution led by military. Its practices, its traditions, these we do not have in Tunisia.
Our president, Jean, all of the students, faculty, and audience really would like to thank you once again for this wonderful.
Thank you for your invitation and for giving me the opportunity to speak with. Thank you.